first, thanks for, once again, taking the time being with us today. Really excited to chat with you, Steve. Steve and I have had several conversations about various topics, and it's going to be fun to try to chat about it with you.
I was going to say that this is really a continuation of a
debate.
debate.
I mean, this is what we do.
That goes on all the time.
We just go on our own little journey together. But for the audience here, maybe you can tell me about SiriusDecisions
sure.
and about the sales operations practice, just for those that aren't familiar with what you guys do.
Yeah, I was actually surprised mingling last night at how many people are SiriusDecisions clients or former clients or hopefully future clients. But we are a research and advisory firm. We focus on business-to-business sales, product, and marketing. And we really bring, I think, three things to our clients. One is we do a lot of primary research and gather a lot of benchmark data. We use that to create models and frameworks and document best practices. And then we help our clients apply those in their environment. So it's all about driving revenue growth. It's all about gaining alignment between marketing, between sales, and between product to support that revenue growth. Now, my practice area, as Andy mentioned, is sales operations. I've been doing sales ops for maybe the last 17 years or so for a couple of very large companies, Quest and Storage Tech, and for a couple of startups as well. But our sales operations practice at SiriusDecisions has been growing pretty dramatically really in the last 3 years. And it's very exciting for me because to see the folks here in the room, you guys are all the people we like working with, we want to talk to, we want to learn from, and hopefully help you in your career paths and in your job performance.
Well, let's talk about some of the research you guys have been doing. Mm-hmm. And Andy talked about sort of different type of the worker revolution and the innovation speed. But you guys have also done some innovative research around this space.
We try to.
And I have some questions about it, but I want you to talk about some of the things you guys have explored.
Yeah, so we actually launched a research project last year, and this has been something we've been hoping to do for a while, and we finally got the critical mass to go off and focus on what are those drivers of sales and what's happening in the buyer's journey and what is that doing to business sales and how is that impacting the things that those of us in this room do on a daily basis. And as we sorted through all these various influences and drivers of change, we sort of narrowed it down to 5 key things. Now this discounts all those macroeconomic things that are going on that impact our business. And we're really focused on what is it that's changing the nature of sales in the business-to-business world. So we start with the digitization of the buyer's journey, and it's something you've heard about all the time. There's this myth that the buyer is 67% or 54% of the way through their journey. We're going to bust that myth in a little bit, but what we're really talking about is exactly what Andy described. The volume of information available at the touch of a button is almost limitless. And so buyers are interacting in new ways with sellers that they've never been able to do in the past. And that's what we mean when we're talking about this digitization of the buyer's journey. This, the focus on customer success and lifetime value, as we were kind of kicking this around a little bit, Somrat says, well, hasn't that always been a concern for companies? And the answer is yes, but it's in the last couple of years where we've really seen, especially maybe driven by software as a service companies, this ongoing focus on that entire customer experience, not just marketing touching them at the top of the funnel and then sales touching them until they close the deal, and then they hand them over to customer service or some sort of service environment. It's a revenue ecosystem. And so we're seeing companies invest more and more and more in a customer success function and looking at that entire customer journey from the very moment they're identified as a lead through the sales process, the handoff into a customer success organization, and then how do you retain them and keep them as a customer and grow that business? Right? Many of you talk about a land and expand strategy in your own business. That's exactly what we're talking about. That first sale could be microscopic, could be a freemium where you download and start using, or a sales rep downloads and starts using your product on the phone, and that slowly begins to build up. And companies need to be aware of where are those touch points with their customers, how do we grow that, and then how do we retain that customer. Democratization of IT, millennialization, kind of the two sides of the same coin. So democratization, it wasn't so many years ago that IT owned everything when it came to technology. And if you wanted to make a change or you wanted a new technology, you had to go to IT, you had to fill out a change request, some sort of business justification, get them to approve it, had to fit into the corporate environment. I know you guys have all lived that. Now, what you're seeing in the business world is exactly what happens here. I customize my own experience with my phone, with my smartphone, with my tablet, with my computer, and that experience in many ways is seamless across those three devices. And that's what's happening in the business world. So you're seeing the user is downloading their own programs, they're configuring their own interfaces. They are now in control of that experience, and sales operations is both, in some ways, the beneficiary, but also the victim of that. So it can be very hard for sales ops to maybe rein that behavior in a little bit. And that's related to this millennialization, and that may be an unfair term because it's putting too much of it might be interpreted as a negative for millennials, and it is not intended to be. I think millennials, being digital natives, growing up with these devices, are rightfully impatient where technology is concerned. And they're not satisfied with something that looks like it was built in an Excel spreadsheet and takes 12 clicks to accept a lead and then 3 more clicks to move it through. And they're sitting there doing the armchair integration between 3 different platforms that should seamlessly share information. So millennials are starting this trend, but it's definitely moving upstream where they don't want to be, they want business software to work for them. They want it to be engaging. They want it to be user-friendly. They want it to be graphically, pleasing to them. And they're impatient when they're forced to use a tool that they don't see the value. So it's that focus on two sides of that coin. Where's the value for the business? Where's the value for the user? And how do you bring those two things together? And the last one, again, no surprise to everyone, is this proliferation of analytics and big data. We're starting to get smarter and smarter about customer behaviors and prospect behaviors and what's a good opportunity and what's a bad opportunity. And one of the challenges for sales operations is to take all that data, kind of weed through it and figure out where are the nuggets within that we can use to be smarter about how we're selling.
So I have a question about this because, we've had data for a long time.
Yep.
Right. Everyone's been accessing data. So what's happening now that's different? Because everyone's been running reports and been doing that for decades now.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
What do you mean by this sort of access to more data, and what's that really meaning for the folks here in the room today?
Yeah, I think there's two things that have happened in the last 3 to 5 years, and you guys are a classic example of this, right? Yes, we've had data around there for a long time, but the tools available to collect, organize, validate, and analyze that data have gotten tremendously better in the last couple of years. Right? Processing power continues to increase, storage continues to get cheaper, so our ability to collect all that data, put it in a cohesive environment, and analyze it has gotten a lot better.
And when you talked about the millennialization, it's really not about millennials per se. What you're saying is that there's this higher standard, right? It's just
absolutely.
And because we, use Uber, I don't know how many people took Uber this morning, there's this expectation, you press a button and everything kind of comes to you.
That's right.
So is it really about millennials, or is it really more about the fact that we've gotten really, this new behavior is sort of driving us to have higher standards?
It's definitely the latter. Millennials are sort of the standard bearer for this because they are digital natives and they've grown up with, let's pick on video games. Right? We talk about gamification, and when I talk about gamification, I'm not talking about sort of this sales contest use of a sports analogy, right? Although that's useful, that's what we're seeing. When I think of gamification, I'm thinking about the experience of using a video game. There's no instruction manual, or if there is, most gamers won't, that gets thrown out with the box. It's immediately engaging, it's visually engaging. You can start into it and it gets progressively more challenging, progressively more difficult. So it really draws in the user and you get involved in what's happening in that game. There's no reason, in my opinion, that same experience can't apply to business software.
Well, so, this is really interesting about the drivers of change. I imagine everybody's gonna go back to their office, tomorrow and Monday, and they're gonna say, how do I embrace this? And you kind of showed me something that I thought was really interesting, and that cleverly called the Sunburst Model. can you talk a little bit about the Sunburst model? And you guys have all, if you have downloaded the Exceed app, we actually have a poll that we're going to go through. So if you haven't downloaded the app already, please do so. It's useful throughout the day. But can you talk a little bit about the Sunburst model?
Sure. This came out of a desire, both from us and from our clients. Probably the number one thing we hear from sales operations leaders is we need a framework within which we can organize and present our business, something that we can talk about to our sales leaders and to marketing leaders and to others within the organization about what is it that we do as sales operations. And we want to be more strategic. That really, we hear that time and time again. We want to play a higher value role in the organization. We want to stop being spreadsheet jockeys, and we want to contribute to understanding of who's our market, who's our customer, what's an efficient sales organization, how should we pay our reps. Those are all things that require analysis. And that's where sales operations leaders, in our opinion, want to go. Now, it's entirely possible that we have a very self-selecting audience, as we have here. Just by virtue of you attending here, you're sort of saying, I want to be smarter about what we're doing. I want to understand what's going on in sales operations, and those are our clients too. So the fact that they want to be more strategic is maybe a self-fulfilling prophecy, but we hear that frequently.
Well, so we're going to switch to, so can you talk about the different types of aspects in the model? And we're going to see, and the question I want to ask for all of you is, as a sales ops leader, where do you spend most of your time today? And you open up the app. You can also text. Well, looks like it's overruled here. Oh, well, ignore the stop. Open up the app. You can take the survey there. But can you talk about the different sort of definitions of what these things mean?
Sure. So think about that Sunburst model. Within that, there's a whole other level. And each of those categories or sectors of that pie, if you will, has multiple dimensions to it. And those are sort of functions. So, for example, in that sales intelligence, it's reporting and dashboarding and analytics and customer analysis and market analysis are all little segments within that pie. And the way the model works, there's sort of entry-level capabilities. So think about reporting. I can create a spreadsheet, or maybe I can use a basic reporting tool. Sort of intermediate capabilities are, I have an analytics tool that is sort of held centrally, and we get reports, and we use that to push out reports. And then the expert level or the advanced level is when you're starting to extend that power, that capability of analytics out to the end user. So that Sunburst actually starts in the middle with sort of basic capabilities and moves out to the outer edge where all those capabilities are concerned. When we go back to it, you'll see that strategy and planning and sales intelligence take up almost 50% of that. And that's where we think sales ops should be spending most of their time, is in those two sectors. And yet, kind of what we're seeing, and this is actually good news because I'm surprised that technology isn't a bigger percentage of this. But we're getting, what, a quarter of you are spending a lot of your time on strategy and planning. I think that should be higher, and I think that combined with sales intelligence, those two should really be a higher percentage of where you're spending your time.
Let me ask a question about this, because, it seems like process and design and management and strategy and planning are some of the two things people are spending time today. When I think of process and design, people think about sales rep process.
Yeah.
And how does a sales rep, move through their sales cycle, and how do you apply methodology to it so you can, win in the right manner? But what about sort of the internal processes that sales management does? Like, a lot of that stuff is, the forecasting calls and the pipeline reviews and all that internal stuff.
Right.
Where does that fit in? And how do you see that, in this model that you're describing?
I mean, it definitely fits in that process design and management, but recognize none of these are standalone. Right? We call that the sales management process, and it's an interesting topic. So we also have a sales enablement practice, which focuses on training and skills and kind of that softer side of sales. And people have been talking about sales manager, that first-line sales manager is the most important individual in the sales organization. For years, we've been talking about that. And yet, very few people, and we should have had a poll on this, very few people have actually invested in their first-line sales managers. Mm-hmm. They kind of, we're going to put our top performing reps into those positions, and they know what to do because they've been in that rep role. So we are starting to see focus being paid to what is that sales management process, What are those weekly meetings, monthly meetings, quarterly meetings? What's the topic and the agenda for those meetings? Who should attend? And then beyond that, what is it the sales manager needs to do to manage the pipeline, to manage the rep? So being very prescriptive about how should the manager do it, what reports should they be reading, what tools should they be using to run those interactions with the sales reps.
And it's interesting about strategy and planning as the number, top two. When I speak to a lot of sales ops leaders, they say, how do they work with the VP of sales? Because a lot of folks that I've spent saying, oh, well, the VP of sales feels like they own strategy and planning. And how do you do that when there's a lot of interesting dynamics in these organizations?
Well, now we're talking about human behavior. So do we really want to go there, Somrat?
Well,
sure.
That's what it comes down. That's what it comes down to, though, because it's not that clear to me. Does the VP of sales, does the sales leaders know that this is where it's a collaboration, it's a true partnership?
Yeah.
And what's the takeaway there?
Well, not to oversimplify, but it's all about trust, and it's all about, I think that's what these guys last night, our guest speakers last night, were talking about when they said, sometimes a top performing player doesn't fit in with the team. They might have all the skills, but they don't fit in with the team, and it's a trust in your peers, trust in your coach, trust in your fellow players that they're going to do the right things. And that trust is built one transaction, one interaction at a time. Mm-hmm. It's no different than a sales rep trying to build trust with a client. It takes time. It's a conscious effort. But sales operations can earn their way into that strategic role. And we were talking about this earlier. I kind of think of it like the relationship between a CEO and their chief of staff, or maybe even the president and their chief of staff. That chief of staff is really setting the agenda. They're bringing the reports. They're deciding what the president sees and who he or she meets with. And the president is setting the tone, just like the head of sales. But it's that sales operations leader who is really down in the weeds, doing the execution, setting the agenda and providing the data for those decisions. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go back to the model here for a second.
Okay.
So I'm curious, as we close up here for Q&A, what do the size of the pies mean? Is that what it is? What the aspirational sort of expectation is? And because I'm trying to understand what those pies size means.
It's definitely aspirational. It's where we think, based on our research, sales operations both wants to go and needs to go. Spending a lot more time on this idea of strategy and planning, and that includes things like market analysis, customer analysis, capacity planning, sales performance analysis, account planning, right? Those customer-facing critical functions that are going to drive the organization to the next level of growth. And then sales intelligence. And sales intelligence, like I said earlier, goes way beyond classic reporting. It's looking for insights and intelligence about customer behavior and sales performance that allow the organization to get to the next level. Again, just to pick on last night, I think it was Brian who was talking about Brent. Yeah, every move you make on the football field is filmed and analyzed, and it's going to be replayed and replayed and replayed again. That's where that sales intelligence is going. Is how do we get better at executing those little things day after day after day that take us up to the next level.
Well, we have a great audience here of sales operations leaders. I mean, if you had to give advice, and one piece of advice for them, given there's probably lots of things in each of these slivers, what would you say, given all the time you spent thinking about the future of sales operations?
You're really going to put me on the spot with that. One piece of advice.
Sorry. We did not prepare for this.
Yeah.
We did not prepare for this.
I mean, I spent a lot of time over the last year looking at change and how people change, and a lot of that is around technology. How do sales reps adopt and begin to use technology? And it's small steps. I mean, it's a conscious decision of, if you decide as a sales operations leader that you want to spend more of your time in those two right halves of this pie, it's a conscious decision, and it's something that you have to take small steps towards. So it's beginning to behave, as that strategy and planning leader, as that sales intelligence leader, and finding ways to offload, automate, or expedite those routine processes that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, we're starting to get a lot of tools that can help you do that.
Well, thank you, Steve. We have a few minutes for Q&A. Can given that he spends all his time thinking about how to make you guys successful. Any questions for Steve to make it more fun here?
Steve, can you explain more about process design and that last of your critical points you said you were spending your time? Kind of go and discuss a little bit more about what is inside that statement.
Yeah, two components. The question was, can I explain a little bit more about what's in that process design and management piece? Two components. There's the internal processes. Lead management. How do I get a lead out of marketing into my Salesforce automation tool? How do I assign it to the right sales rep? Opportunity management. What is that sales process? How do we manage our pipeline? What are the sales stages? Account management and contact management. So those all kind of fall into that internal process management that we think about, sometimes called sort of lead to order, order to cash, right? The other component to that is that externally facing, and that's the sales process that's built around the buyer's journey. So when we think about how a buyer makes that buyers, because there's hardly these days any single decision maker, how they make that purchase decision, we want our sales process to line up with that so that we're kind of giving the right message to the right buyer at the right time in their journey, right? So those are the two components to that, and it's a never-ending struggle to get those right.
We have another question over there.
Hi Steve, my name is Phil. Thank you for speaking. So I think many sales ops leaders can probably agree with me that we lack resources in our organizations many times. Through your research, what have you found as the best ratio of sales ops people to the number of either account executives or the entire sales team or to the entire organization?
I wish I could give you an easy answer that it's 15% or 17%, but I'm going to take the analyst or consultant way out and say it depends. And it really does.
You got to get it better than that.
Well, we see organizations that are 50 million in revenue that have 2 sales ops people. We see organizations that are 500 million in revenue that have 30 or 40 sales ops people. So there's no absolute ratio. I'll tell you what I can offer though. You all have my email address, right? We do benchmark data. So if you want to send me your contact information and your company name and size, we'll do a little dialogue. I'll get you that benchmark information on what some of your peers are doing in terms of sales ops resources. So I know that's a cop-out, but there's no one answer that's going to, I know, there's no one answer that's going to fit everybody here, though.
Could you maybe elaborate on, hey, is it a better alignment to the number of account executives, to the entire sales team, or the entire organization, since long-time sales ops?
It's usually a percentage of sales revenue, right, is the way we track it. It's how much of the sales ops budget is a percentage of revenue. We look at full-time equivalents, and we look at sales ops as a percentage of revenue.
One last question. Let's get some love on this side. No love on this side? All right, there we go.
This goes to your very first point you kind of brought up about the customer journey. So the customer journey touches every part of the organization, from marketing, the front end, to support services, everything on the back end. But this is still technically a sales ops role. How do you see that? How do you see that model changing? Because it really incorporates how do we use professional services organization, customer support organization. All those folks have to be tied into the same concept and the same vision. Yeah. But again, this is kind of a sales ops perspective. So how do you incorporate all those other components where typically there may not be an operations person dedicated, or if there is, it might be a single entity.
So great question. Did everybody hear the question? How is that digitization of the buyer's journey changes to the buyer's journey changing sales ops? Do I have time for
a quick? Keep it.
Okay.
Pequeño. I'm trying to be inspired by Cinco de Mayo, so.
Oh, that's a quick answer.
Did a horrible job there in my Spanish, so.
So we're starting to see the emergence of a chief revenue officer. Does anybody have a chief revenue officer in their organization? Okay, you guys are seeing it too. Who is looking at that entire revenue ecosystem? How do we generate, top of the funnel pipeline from marketing? How does that get turned over to sales? What is marketing's role throughout that journey? And we did a study last year, and I wanted to come back to this anyway, this myth of the buyer is X% of the way through their decision-making process before a sales rep ever gets engaged. Everybody heard that?
Yep.
That has been grossly misinterpreted. I'm here to tell you that today. When we study it, sales, there are digital interactions and there are human interactions that occur throughout that buyer's journey, right? Think about the way you behave as a consumer if you're buying a new car. You don't get to some mystical point in your car decision journey before you walk into a showroom. You're going to kind of narrow the choices. I think I want a Beetle, or I want a Mazda, or I want a Mini Cooper. But you're going to go test drive those cars. Then you're going to go away and you're going to do your research online. And then you're going to come back and you know, now you're going to start thinking about which one do I really want. That's exactly the same way business-to-business buyers happen. So it's very episodic throughout that buyer's journey. There's multiple touch points. There's both human and digital interactions throughout there. So sales operations is going further up the pipeline than they may have ever before, and deeper into that customer experience than they may have before. Does that make sense? Where you're seeing really a blurring of the lines. There's no more marketing generates a lead, hands it to sales, sales closes it and hands it over to customer service.
So what I'm hearing is that there's more work for them to do.
There's a lot more work.
Okay.
Yeah, you got to be thinking about that revenue ecosystem, especially in a software as a service model or recurring revenue model. You cannot just close the deal and go, that's it, it's somebody else's problem now.
Well, I think that's our time for today. First, round of applause for Steve for spending time with us.